First one is like forecasting going into like FY25. There is a lot that can go into this, so I'm gonna try to stay kind of high level. But I put it into like three different like categories here. One is, how do you analyze your current funnel and life cycle by segment? That's kind of like one piece that's super important. The second one is the cross-functional alignment. This is something that I see all the time where leaders are not necessarily on the same page around how we're going to drive it, right? Like, is this going to be marketing kind of like driving this? Is it going to be the SDR team? And as you know, the SDR team is getting more and more challenged these days. Or is it going to be like AEs sourced? And then we'll talk about pipeline creation. So first is, what does your funnel look like? Like, have you analyzed every single like pipeline, but not just kind of like the total pipeline, but also per reps? Because I think that's important, right? When you think about it, sometimes there are some rock stars and then there are like kind of like below average. So like, you don't necessarily want to just do the aggregate. You also want to see like from like the performance at the rep level. And really thinking about the stages that you have, right? Like, do those still matter? Because that's one of the things as well that we see so often, right? It's like you set those stages, but the stages were set like 2 or 3 years ago and you haven't touched them. Are they still relevant today, right? Your motion is probably evolved over the years, right? Do you still need like stage 5 or like whatever you're saying at stage 5? Maybe it's a quote send, or maybe it's, you know, there's so many different stages, but usually you get those 5-6 stages. Like, do you have the right stages? That's something that we look into it. We also look into thinking about the conversion, right? Like, how are those opportunities being created in the first place? Are those relevant, right? There's a lot of like, and it goes back to kind of like the alignment between marketing and sales around like marketing driving a lot of like SQL, and then what are some of the incentives between SQL to SPO, self-qualified opportunity, right? So like, those things really matters, because you don't want to kind of like overinflate your pipeline, because what usually happen is that now you have an open pipe that looks really good on paper, but the conversions get crushed after like kind of like the stage 2, because they don't move forward. So really kind of like being very thoughtful around the stages that you have and how the entry criteria for all the stages. That's not something that we see often, right? So like, because it's usually not standardized, you don't see that on the ops, and that's something that we look into and make sure there's a process around that. So that's kind of like one piece. When you have the stages, when you know the conversions per reps, then you can start really building kind of like a better forecast, just overall. Then the second piece, go ahead.
So Jeremy, I have a question, in that area where, if you change some of those life cycle, over a period of time as company grows, that's where the challenge there, right? Some of the data they were tracking were in a different life cycle. And if you have a new life cycle needs to be, or a step needs to be added or needs to be removed. So that needs to be changed, and that needs to be synced with the data side of it, right? And make sure that it's synced.
Yeah,
there are some challenges coming up in that area as well, right?
It's a great call. And I'll give you an example. Like, recently I was working with a client where their kind of like the ramp up period was like super long for certain segments, super long, because the expectation was the life cycle was like super long. And I actually went through the math and I looked into all of our closed won opportunities within that segment, and it was much shorter. And so folks were still like from like 2 or 3 years ago, where that was the expected life cycle, and didn't realize that it was much faster now. So when you were thinking about like even setting the compensation, they were giving them like 6 to 9 months of like ramp up, where it was probably close to 3 months required, right? All those things matters, right? Because you want to bring urgency. And that's usually kind of like where revenue operation comes in, because they can see like the whole 360, not just being stuck on like one piece of the life cycle, but how does it impact cash flows? How does it impact kind of like your forecast? How does it impact your ramp? How does it impact your goals? All of those things. Thanks for bringing it up.
Thanks, Jeremy.
The other piece is what metrics do you want to drive? And I think this is kind of like a very, it sounds like an easy topic to have, But for the most part, what I've seen is that folks don't necessarily pick the right metrics to work on. And I think for the most part, it's no one's fault. I think most of the companies that we work with, they move really, really fast. There's always kind of like a new shiny objects coming in. We want to track new things, right? But what we've seen in terms of like best in class is folks that have been able to kind of like, and we'll talk about like kind of being like disciplined and like trying to stick with like a few metrics, but like really understanding what is going to drive the business, right? So it could be conversion, it could be like life cycle, but really think about ones that are actually moving the needle. And I think that's really, really important, because sometimes I see like some of the metrics and they're like sub metrics, and it's like, how is it gonna tie to your goal for like next year? Like if you do this well, how much more incremental money are you gonna get, right? That's very important. So like really understanding like those metrics are gonna be the ones driving the most improvement. So that's another piece. And the last piece is the pipeline creation. Right, pipeline creation is for us like it's an issue for everybody these days. You know, not just like enterprise, like even SMBs, right? Like SMBs used to be able to create pipe by just like sending emails. Now they can't do that because none of those emails are going through the inbox. They don't get any response. Calls are not being answered, and so, or they are being answered, but it's just like the connected rate is like half or a third of what it used to be. So the motion is like much harder. So really think about like kind of like a little bit about like the team structure there as well. We'll talk a little more later. But here's an example around like your AEs. Are they working on too many things at once? Something we see all the time. Again, no one's fault. Companies are coming in. There is no SDR. There is no CS team. There is only like a couple of sellers, right? And as they grow, the sellers keep the same responsibilities, which is to own new business, but also own like renewals. You have at some point to move away from that model, right? And take some risk around like my AEs are responsible for like new business, right? That's how you bring a very high sales productivity to your team, right? You can't have a high sales productivity if folks are doing too many things at once. So that's just kind of like a point that everyone should be paying attention. Too easy to fall through this. And some of the other things are like, have you aligned with departments on the milestone? I think that's also alignment is super important, right? And the last piece here is the lag that it takes, right? So forecast is really understanding kind of like the funnel conversion to make sure you have the right stage, the right entry criteria, you understand the life cycle and so on. But also you want to understand like how much new pipe creation you need to create in order to get to your FY25. So it's true. Sometimes you'll tell me like, oh, my life cycle is like 9 months. Okay, well, 9 months. But that means that in Q1, you have to take into consideration how much pipe creations you're going to create in Q1, because that's going to hit by FY25. So just another kind of like reminder around like thinking about the forecast, open pipe, new pipe creation, and everything in between.
Right. So I would like to add one more point here is, right, in terms of a lot of the new changes or things happening in the tech side of it, AI side of it coming into play. We will be, helping with some of these clients with, prototyping it, testing it out, making sure that that's working, and making sure that we have some early adopters to see how it is working, and then we will roll out to some of our clients. So that's a as aspect also we need to take into account.